your response, Mr. Babich, coming from Russia, about the leak, the specific accusations, and the Russian government's denial of any Russian involvement in the so-called hacking.
Well, I think that the fury in the Western media about this leak is somewhat misguided, because the information was genuine. The names of the American athletes who used prohibited substances on WADA's permission, these names were made public. Simone Biles and others. With Russia, the story was very different. For example, the Russian Paralympians, the disabled athletes who were barred collectively from going to Rio, this was based on unconfirmed report by the WADA, by the World Anti-Doping Agency, because WADA said that they had 35 cases when there were irregularities with the Russian Paralympians, anti-doping tests, but they never gave any names. So we don't even know which of the Russian Paralympians were accused of using the doping. And as a result, all 200 Russian disabled athletes were unable to go to Rio. So not only it was a collective punishment, it was also a punishment without any proof.
I think Mr. Babich...
that's why Russia is so angry, and that's
Mr.
why
Babich,
it is, in fact, irrelevant.
Well, Mr. Babich, you answer my question in a way, give me double substance. One is your response to the story itself. The other is why Russia was being punished without a real reasoning. It seems that is your argument. So let me go to you, Mr. Dunham, even though you're coming from the United States, but you're a journalist. So let me ask you, both WADA and the US ADA has already condemned the so-called hacking. Of course, Kremlin has denied any Russian involvement in the hacking. And yet, we have seen some US athletes seem to, apparently, have some problems.
Well, there are multiple issues there. First, it's laughable to say there's no Russian involvement. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Why is that?
Because it's the group that did the hacking is Russian. Now you
How
could
did
say
you know that?
Who claimed credit
for
it?
Who claim? Would you trust anyone who's doing the hacking claim themselves to be whom, and therefore trust them?
Yes, if Al Qaeda claims that it ran the planes into the World Trade Center. No, obviously. No, but again, we're having the wrong discussion here.
What is the right discussion to you?
The right discussion is two issues. One is the pervasive doping that's been going on with Russian athletes, and the question of whether collective punishment is fair or not. I mean, there's pervasive doping going on in Russia, no question. But the question is, should every Paralympic athlete be forbidden? That's a good question.
What about the U.S. athletes? I think that is the attention right now.
The second question is WADA and the secrecy there, and the question of, obviously it's violation of secrecy, but it's accurate information. No question it's accurate information.
WADA has confirmed about the information.
I think we could have a good debate here instead of arguing about who did it or the motives.
One of the things
let's have a good debate on what is acceptable doping and what is unacceptable doping.
Okay, Mr. Dunham, if I could just follow you by fairly asking, I think from the third person's perspective, why, when it comes to the Russian athletes, they're immediately banned, and why, when it comes to American athletes, then let's have a debate?
I'm not saying that the Russian athletes should have been banned.
All right, that's interesting.
Because that's collective punishment. I think that's wrong.
All right, let me go to you, Mr. Yan. What about these athletes? I mean, even revealed by the hacking materials. WADA at this time have already confirmed that the revealed materials are real, and yet they have condemned the hacking. But let me ask you about the content of the revealed documents or hacked documents. About the Williams sisters. The documents have shown they have taken substances that are supposed to be falling into the category of quote-unquote doping. And yet the documents hacked also revealed on the same page that they have given special permission by the International Tennis Federation, which should be where they come from. However, when it comes to other athletes, also coming from the US,
Simone Biles,
for example, their specific documents did not indicate any special permission being given by the sports federation that he or she belonged to.
Yeah.
And yet that category, according to the latest news reports, also confirmed by WADA, only named confidential.
Yeah, I think I cannot answer you.
How should we understand
Nobody
this?
can answer this
Nobody
question.
can answer that. Why
only
is that?
WADA, only WADA itself could answer you this question. And WADA never disclosed its whole working process. You know, they're using the top secrecy, you know, or they have to keep everything confidential. But this kind of confidential situation is also something which really mystifies everybody. You know, it seems WADA is a warrior with the only sword and access, you know, they could chop anyone, any head. But what's the regulation? What's the discipline behind this? You know, this really, you know.
Who is scrutinizing their
I think that's
work.
exactly what infuriates, you know, our Russian sports people or our Russian government there. You know, the Fencerbear group should be a kind of Russian, you know, hacking group. You know, there might not be too much doubt about that. But, you know, they disclosed this kind of confidential stuff. And what is procedure of WADA? Why could WADA, you know, ban these Russian athletes but not the others? I'm not mentioning only Simone Biles, but there must be other names involved. Now it's time for WADA to come forward and to disclose its own working process.
Interesting. Let me go back to you, Mr. Babich. Is that what you want? I mean, from a sports commentator's perspective in Russia, is that what you want, for WADA to come out and clarify the working procedures and why some sports people are being put in this category, being banned, while others are not necessarily so? Even apparently, they seem to also have a doping problem with or without permissions.
Well, I think it's not just Russia that wants it, but international sports wants it. You know, many countries want it because, okay, this year it was done with Russia, the collective punishment, the double standard. Next year it can be done with China, with India, with any other country that the United States, Canada, and Britain do not like. And the United States, Canada, and Britain have dominating positions in WADA. Just look at the people who are at the top inside the WADA. So I agree with our American colleague that the question of collective punishment should be discussed. And the answer to this question is very simple. There should be no collective punishment. Since the times of Roman law, collective punishment is not practiced in civilized countries. And I think I didn't say that I have proof that Russia was not involved in hacking. I think it could be done by groups, not only from Russia, but it could be done by journalists, it could be done by civil activists, not necessarily from Russia, maybe from other countries. The main question is not who hacked WADA. The main question is it the truth or not?
Okay.
Let me remind you that during the Watergate scandal, some of the information used against Nixon was obtained by not very honest means by the journalist. But that was not the question discussed during Mr. Nixon's dismissal. The question discussed was, were these facts true or not?
Okay.
The facts on American athletes were true.
Got your point.
And it's very strange that the American athletes...
I have got your point, Mr. Babich. I got your point 3 times. All right, let me ask you, Mr. Dunham. I don't see you as just coming from Americans' perspective, but rather from a journalist perspective. It is not just WADA, which is the drug testing agency that is responsible for the overall procedure, but also the sports federations.
Exactly.
Because the sports federations, they are the ones giving permission or denial to an athlete whether they could take certain kinds of drugs that are falling into the doping categories. So who is scrutinizing their work? Whether they are International Basketball Association,
That's a problem.
or
of all
tennis,
these so super international organizations.
or wrestling, whether they are chairman is Russian or American or others, who are scrutinizing their job, and why would they give permission or not to certain athletes?
Well, each sport has its own oversight body,
right.
and they are controlled by cliques within. I mean, you saw in FIFA with football, real scandal. I mean, major scandals having to do with World Cup and everything else. But
Gymnastics, track and field.
there is not. I mean, the problem is they all are little kingdoms, and they all are run by people who are not very open, and we don't have a lot of transparency there. And they can give these waivers, and they can also give punishments.
Right.
I mean, go to Lance Armstrong. I mean, a major violator of doping, and his punishment was not by the World Anti-Doping; it was by the cycling people.
But the cycling people also covered it up, you know.
Right,
so
exactly.
for so
And that's
many
the
years.
problem.
This is
Being
the
bullied
thing,
by
Mr.
himself.
Yan,
Right.
because you have been working in the sports field for such a long time. I know you are a very devoted sports fan, but at the same time, I should also ask you, how much scrutiny should we give to modern sports these days, especially professional modern sports these days, because it is so much linked to the benefits, to the money.
Are we talking about
to the
China or
business?
internationally? I could start from
Both.
China. You know, I mean, you know, for the past 20 years, China has been very strict in all this anti-doping process. Even though, you know, before the Rio Olympics, I think in the Beijing office of anti-doping being closed by WADA. I don't know what's the reason behind that, but China has been very consistent in this process. But anyhow, you know, there are still, because of different you know, benefits or different background, there were still all kinds of cases of doping coming out. The problem in the overall structure internationally, I would say, you know, for the oversight bodies, especially like FIFA, you know, IAAF, you know, there are not exactly any other organizations which are scrutinizing them, and we should add a WADA into that. You know, who is observing WADA? You know, what if WADA itself is not clean or right enough? Then what will be? You know, we are living in a very, very confused world, I would say.
Well, if everybody is confused, if everybody quote unquote is evil, does that make the whole thing right?
Evil plus evil, you know, it makes it more
Well,
evil.
I don't want to go into conspiracy theories, but I think this is a legitimate question to ask Mr. Babich. From your perspective, what is the relations between doping and modern sports that we have witnessed these years? We see the prosperity of modern sports through the Olympic campaigns, through various kinds of professional sports, but there has been a confusion from this year's Olympics particularly. How much should we believe about the achievements of sports, and how much really it is linked to the doping issues that we have been so much concerned of over the past few years? Mr. Babich.
Well, I think that certainly big money is killing sport, because when you have tens of millions of dollars dependent on just one wrong move, then of course you have a lot of dirty games around it. It's natural. So from the beginning of the Olympic movement, one of the goals which its founders set for themselves was to protect the Olympic movement from big money and from big politics. And the world has been pretty successful in that until 1980, when for the first time the Moscow Olympic Games was boycotted by the United States and their allies for political reasons. Then the Soviet Union reciprocated very stupidly in 1984, boycotting the Los Angeles Games. Now we had this whole campaign against the Olympic Games in Sochi, waged by the Western media. So we have big politics and big money attacking sports. I think it should be up to the whole world to protect the sports from this attack. How can we do it? Only by applying some very rigorous standards. If WADA accuses certain athletes of doping, it should produce evidence. Just like in any court, just like in any normal justice system, you cannot disqualify people without producing any evidence. And of course, you cannot disqualify people collectively. So we have seen it this year. Unfortunately, this year was terrible for the Olympic movement. It happened that Russia was the victim. Next year, the victim can be China or any other country.
You've been given that warning from the very beginning, Mr. Babich. So let me come back to you, Mr. Yan. What do you think? How much shall we believe in the achievements of the modern sports? What has been its relations and should be its relations to, let's just say, the improvements of the medication? Or how should we understand its relations with doping throughout the history?
There's another question that I cannot answer.
Yes.
You know, we're coming on a kind of boundary. You know, we cannot stay extremely clean, saying this is all natural, or it has no involvement of modern science, of modern medical, you know, assistance. It's a question that we cannot answer. I know maybe WADA could give us a great example, but you know, we're entering a vast gray area. You know, it's impossible. It's really impossible. It's challenging on a foundation of the Olympic spirit.
There seems to be.
I really want to know, Rick, what's your view on this question?
Well, I mean, I say athletes have pushed the bounds of what is legal, what is medically acceptable, and then you've also had widespread doping. East Germany is the best example, going back to the 1970s and 80s. But I mean, in this case, you do have a scandal in Russia. President Putin has condemned the people who were involved in the doping there. So I don't think there's a debate of whether there's doping in Russia. There's a debate over what the punishment should be, and I think that's what we really should be talking about here.
And the last question I should have, I think Mr. Babich already given the answer, but I will give him a chance also for the final words. But before we go, I do want to ask the both of you. Mr. Dunham, what should be the relations between sports and politics? Some say it should be no relationship between these two, but we are living in the real world, so how should we understand this?
Well, my grandfather was a philosopher, and he would say there shouldn't be a relationship. There's no way to do that. There is a relationship. There was during the Cold War, where U.S. judges gave bad marks to the Soviets. Soviet judges did to the U.S. Right. We should just try to keep it at a minimum. And politics will always be there, but I think it is the financial mismanagement that's a deep problem.
Now it is the problem. Mr. Yan, 30 seconds for you.
We have to accept, you know, we are living in a realistic world. You know, politics and sports could never be really detached. We have just to give more independence to sports, especially to sports people.
Very important. Mr. Babich, we got only 20 seconds left for you, sir. So would you? Final word.
Okay. Well, I believe that sports can be saved by the solidarity of athletes. In the old times, politicians argued, but athletes were together. So this time, the saddest thing is that American and British athletes called for the collective punishment of Russian athletes. This thing should not be repeated again. Never repeat it again.